In sun-drenched Kailua Hawaii, a 65-year-old retired teacher was about to face the ultimate betrayal. What started as a casual family dinner took a shocking turn when her own children demanded financial support as if it was owed to them. Eleanor Nakamura wasn't your typical grandmother. For 20 years she had managed her family's successful flower business worth millions, known for her gentle wisdom and resilient spirit. When her ungrateful children demanded money from her retirement fund, they had no idea they were triggering the most calculated response in family history. Eleanor's methodical invoice would systematically expose their entitlement and transform her legacy forever. What began as selfish demands would become perfect justice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Eleanor Nakamura stood at her lanai window, watching the palm trees sway against the backdrop of crystal blue ocean. At 65, she still moved with purpose through her beachside home, though her morning ritual of organizing her business accounts had taken longer than usual. The flower farm's quarterly reports lay spread across the kitchen counter, each spreadsheet telling the story of her 20 years of careful management since her husband's passing. The business had flourished under her guidance, becoming one of the largest suppliers of tropical flowers to hotels and wedding venues across the islands. "They're here," she murmured to herself, smoothing her favorite floral dress and checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. The lines around her eyes had deepened since last year's family gathering, but her silver-streaked black hair was neatly styled, and her posture remained straight. She'd spent 3 days preparing for this dinner, cleaning rooms that hadn't been used in months, ordering her children's favorite foods from the local restaurants they'd loved growing up. The doorbell chimed as Michael emerged from his luxury SUV, his expensive designer clothes broadcasting success that Eleanor knew was mostly facade. At 42, he carried himself with the forced confidence of a man perpetually chasing the next big opportunity. Eleanor had raised him to be ambitious, perhaps too ambitious. Now that ambition had curdled into something harder, more demanding, less grounded in reality. "Mom," Michael's voice carried across the yard, hearty and performative. "Look at this place. The landscaping is amazing. You've really kept everything perfect." Behind him, Jennifer climbed out of her convertible, her movements careful and measured. At 39, she possessed an intelligence that had been shaped by years of calculated networking and social climbing. Her husband Robert had stayed in California. This time, a detail that hadn't escaped Eleanor's notice. Their teenagers, Lily and Jason, emerged reluctantly from the vehicle, already absorbed in their phones. Daniel's modest sedan brought up the rear, the engine making the particular sound of deferred maintenance. Eleanor's youngest son approached with the hesitant gait of someone perpetually uncertain of his welcome. At 35, he still carried the wounded demeanor of a child perpetually trying to measure up to his older siblings. "Welcome home," Eleanor called, opening her arms to embrace each of them in turn. Michael's hug was quick and distracted. She could already see him calculating, assessing, taking inventory of what had changed since his last visit. Jennifer's embrace lingered longer, heavy with unspoken manipulation. Daniel's was genuine but brief, as if he feared imposing. "Grandma." Lily's genuine enthusiasm cut through the adult tension like sunlight through storm clouds. At 16, Eleanor's eldest granddaughter still possessed the authenticity that her parents had lost somewhere along the way. "The garden looks amazing. Did you plant those bird of paradise by the gate?" "Last spring," Eleanor replied, her voice warming. "I thought you might like them. They remind me of you, always reaching for something beautiful." Michael was already on his phone, pacing near the porch. "I don't care what the developer says, Greg. The property is worth twice that. Find another appraiser." His voice carried the sharp edge of desperation poorly disguised as authority. Jennifer watched her brother with familiar concern. "Michael, maybe we should focus on family time this weekend?" "This is family time," Michael snapped, covering his phone. "This is about securing our future. Mom's future." His eyes swept the property with obvious calculation: 3 acres of prime Kailua real estate, a house that had been lovingly maintained, and the successful flower business that spoke of careful stewardship and substantial value. Eleanor pretended not to notice the assessment in his gaze. She'd seen that look before in the eyes of developers who'd offered to buy her land, in the faces of distant relatives who only called when they needed money. But seeing it in her eldest son's eyes felt like swallowing broken glass. "Come inside," she said, forcing brightness into her voice. "I've ordered your favorite poke bowls, Michael, and Jennifer. I found that Lalikoi cheesecake you loved from Mauna Kea Bakery." The tour of the house became an exercise in subtle inventory. Michael noted the new solar panels, the updated kitchen, the solid hardwood floors that would photograph well in a real estate listing. Jennifer admired the family photographs lining the hallway, but Eleanor caught her studying the antique Hawaiian furniture with the eye of someone mentally cataloging valuable items. Only Daniel seemed genuinely interested in the stories behind the improvements. "You did all this backyard redesign yourself, Mom?" "Keone helped," Eleanor replied. "He's handy with landscaping, more useful than most people give him credit for." "Keone's the gardener?" Michael asked, though they all knew Keone Alana was far more than that. For 5 years, he'd been Eleanor's right hand in the business, driver, companion, and increasingly her closest confidant. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "He's family," Eleanor said quietly, noting how Michael's jaw tightened at the word. Lunch progressed with the careful choreography of a family that had perfected the art of avoiding real conversation. Michael dominated discussion with stories of his latest business ventures, his voice growing louder as he tried to convince himself as much as his audience. Jennifer deflected every attempt to discuss her own life in California, particularly when Eleanor asked about Robert's absence. "He's overseeing a major client project this weekend," Jennifer explained. It was impossible to reschedule. It was a reasonable explanation that didn't quite ring true. Eleanor had learned to read the spaces between her children's words, the careful omissions that revealed more than any confession. Daniel spoke little throughout the meal, his contributions growing more defensive whenever Michael made casual comments about people who can't find their direction in life. Daniel's face flushed red at these thinly veiled critiques. "At least I'm not leveraged up to my eyeballs," Daniel muttered when Michael boasted about his new car. The temperature at the table dropped 10 degrees. Michael's fork froze halfway to his mouth, and Jennifer immediately began her practiced role as family mediator. "Let's not," she began. "Let's not what?" Michael's voice carried warning. "Daniel, you want to finish that thought?" Eleanor watched the familiar dynamic unfold, Michael asserting dominance, Daniel shrinking back, Jennifer desperately trying to maintain peace. It was a dance they'd performed for decades, and she was tired of watching it. "Children," she said quietly, but with enough steel in her voice to command attention. "This is supposed to be a celebration." The afternoon brought a temporary reprieve as Lily helped Eleanor in the garden while the adults spread across the property. But the peace was fragile, built on careful avoidance rather than genuine harmony. As evening approached, Eleanor retreated to her office to review some business paperwork. Through the window, she could see Michael on the phone again, his free hand gesticulating angrily. Daniel sat on the porch steps, scrolling through job listings on his phone. Jennifer stood between them, literally and figuratively, her shoulders carrying the weight of trying to hold a family together that seemed determined to fracture. The first direct comment about money came during dinner preparation. Eleanor had excused herself to check the catering delivery when Michael appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Mom, don't you think it's time to consider downsizing?" He gestured toward the spacious kitchen. "This place is beautiful, but it's a lot for one person to maintain." "I manage just fine," Eleanor replied evenly. "And I love this home. Your father and I built it together." "Dad's been gone for 20 years, Michael said with a laugh that held no humor. "The market's hot right now. You could sell this place for $7 million, easy. Move into something more practical." Jennifer joined them, drawn by the tension in Michael's voice. "Mom does seem to manage just fine," she said carefully. "But maybe considering your options wouldn't hurt? Planning for the future?" Eleanor felt something cold settle in her chest. Her children saw her careful estate management not as responsible self-care but as evidence of waste, of unnecessary sentiment that inconvenienced their perception of her as a financial resource to be optimized. "I'll consider it," she said, though she had no intention of doing so. Daniel wandered in, caught the tail end of the conversation. "What are we talking about?" "Mom's real estate portfolio," Michael said with that same hollow laugh. "We're staging an intervention." "Michael," Jennifer warned, but her protest lacked conviction. "I'm serious," Michael continued, warming to his theme. "Look at her. Does she look like she needs this much space? She's letting sentiment and inertia cost her millions when she could be maximizing her assets." Eleanor turned to face her children. These adults she'd raised and sacrificed for, who now stood in judgment of her most basic act of self-determination, the choice to live in the home she loved, that she and her late husband had designed together, that carried 20 years of memories both painful and precious. "Maybe," Jennifer said cautiously, "we should help Mom look into her financial options. Like a family project." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was just beginning to catch. Eleanor saw the idea take root in Michael's eyes. Saw Daniel's weak protest die on his lips. "Just to be proactive," Michael said thoughtfully. "To ensure Mom's comfortable future. Show her she has more options than she realizes." That's not, Daniel began. It's being responsible, Michael interrupted. What kind of children would we be if we didn't help Mom maximize her retirement security? Eleanor felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, the foundation of trust she'd built with her children cracking like thin ice in the sun. They were discussing her home, her life, her autonomy as if she weren't standing right there, as if she were a problem to be solved rather than a person to be respected. I think, she said quietly, I'll check on the dessert now. But the seed had been planted. She could see it in Michael's calculating expression, in the way Jennifer avoided her eyes, in Daniel's desperate need to avoid conflict with his older siblings. As Eleanor arranged the lilikoi cheesecake slices on delicate plates, she felt the first chill of genuine fear. Not fear of financial insecurity, she'd made peace with her stable situation long ago. Fear of her own children and what they might convince themselves was best for her. Outside, the Hawaiian breeze picked up, rustling through the plumeria trees that stretched toward the horizon, the same land her husband had loved until the day he died, the same earth that had sustained their family for decades. Tomorrow was Sunday, and her children would be here for one more day. Eleanor had no idea it would be the last day she would ever trust them with her financial security. As she prepared for bed, organizing tomorrow's schedule in her small planner, she caught Michael watching her from the hallway, his expression thoughtful, calculating, and something else she couldn't quite identify, something that looked disturbingly like resolution. Eleanor's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the business ledger where her quarterly profit statements should have been. The desk drawer, usually organized with military precision, held only empty space where the financial documents normally waited in their labeled folder. That's strange, she murmured, checking the cabinet beneath. Nothing. Her profit and loss statements, bank records, business loan documents, all gone. The sound of muffled conversation drifted from the living room, and Eleanor felt the first flutter of unease in her chest, not the familiar flutter of grief for her late husband, but something deeper, something that spoke of betrayal in a language she didn't want to understand. Michael, she called, her voice steady despite the growing concern. Have you seen my business files? Her eldest son appeared in the doorway, coffee mug in hand, his expression carefully neutral. Your what, Mom? My quarterly statements. They were right here in this drawer. Michael's pause lasted exactly 1 second too long. Maybe you already filed them away somewhere else? You know how organizational systems can get confusing. The suggestion hit Eleanor like cold water. She'd been managing her business files for 20 years since her husband's death. The routine was as natural, as breathing, as automatic as sunrise. She knew with absolute certainty that she hadn't moved them. I haven't moved them, she said firmly. They're missing. Jennifer joined them, her movements quick and nervous. Behind her, Daniel lurked in the hallway, avoiding Eleanor's eyes. The three of them formed a loose semicircle around her, and Eleanor felt something shift in the air, a subtle change in dynamics that made her skin prickle with warning. Mom, you're being a little dramatic, Jennifer said, her voice carrying forced lightness. They have to be somewhere. Dramatic? Eleanor's tone sharpened. These documents contain sensitive financial information about our family business. See, this is exactly what we were talking about, Michael interrupted, setting his coffee down with deliberate casualness. You've convinced yourself you need to manage everything personally. What if we showed you there's a better way? The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was already spreading. Eleanor stared at her son, trying to process what she was hearing. What do you mean, a better way? Daniel shifted uncomfortably behind Jennifer, his face flushed whether from embarrassment or guilt, Eleanor couldn't tell. It's just that we've been looking at your finances, Mom, Jennifer said, her voice taking on the patronizing tone she used with difficult clients. And we've identified some inefficiencies. Inefficiencies? The word felt foreign on Eleanor's tongue. The flower business is underperforming, Michael said bluntly. You're sitting on millions in real estate while maintaining profit margins that barely keep pace with inflation. It doesn't make sense. You've been looking at my finances? Eleanor felt her chest tighten with rising indignation. You took my private business documents without permission? We're helping you, Michael said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone he used with difficult employees. You've become dependent on doing things the old way. Sometimes fresh eyes can see opportunities you're missing. Eleanor looked at her daughter, her intelligent, educated daughter who had somehow convinced herself that 20 years of successful business management was merely sentimental inefficiency. Jennifer, please. Those documents are private. Financial management will be fine for 24 hours, Jennifer said firmly. Millions of people hire financial advisors. You did it yourself for 45 years before taking over the business. That was before I was the owner, Eleanor's voice rose, and she felt the familiar spike of stress that came with having her boundaries violated. "Mom, you're getting worked up over nothing," Daniel said, his words slightly rushed. "Chill out. It's not like we're trying to hurt you." The casual dismissal of her privacy, the reduction of her genuine business concerns to emotional overreaction hit Eleanor harder than any physical blow. These were her children, the people she'd raised, sacrificed for, loved unconditionally, and they were treating her like a confused child who needed to be managed rather than respected. "Where are they?" she demanded. "I want my business documents back now." "Tomorrow," Michael said with finality. "We'll give them back tomorrow evening after we've had a chance to present our findings. We've identified some really exciting opportunities." Eleanor felt the room tilt slightly. Her family business, carefully managed for decades, was being treated like a case study by her children. But worse than the privacy violation was the emotional devastation of realizing that her children saw her not as a competent adult managing a successful enterprise, but as an outdated thinker who needed to be humored and corrected. "This is a violation of my privacy," she said quietly. Michael laughed, actually laughed. "Mom, don't be ridiculous. We're your children. We love you. We're trying to help you realize your business has untapped potential. We want you to be set for life." The laughter was the breaking point. Eleanor looked at her 3 children, really looked at them, and saw strangers. Strangers who had decided they knew better than her decades of experience, better than her careful management, better than her clearly stated boundaries. "I'm calling my lawyer," she said, moving toward the phone. "And tell him what?" Michael's voice hardened. "That your loving children are concerned about your financial future? I'm sure he'll be very interested to hear about your emotional attachment to outdated business practices." Eleanor's hand froze on the phone receiver. Michael's tone carried a threat she couldn't quite name, but the message was clear. They had already crafted their narrative. If she sought help, she would be painted as the problem. The morning sun streamed through the office window, illuminating the empty space where her business documents should have been. Eleanor felt her heart begin to race, whether from anger, shock, or the awful recognition of her complete vulnerability, she couldn't tell. Her children had taken her financial information and convinced themselves they were doing her a favor. They had turned her business expertise into a joke, her autonomy into a problem to be solved. And as Eleanor stood there, surrounded by the people who were supposed to protect her, she realized that she was entirely alone. The intervention had begun, but Eleanor Nakamura didn't know yet that by evening, it would trigger a response that would change her family forever. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Eleanor's lanai as she sat at the table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She said, though she had no intention of doing so. Daniel wandered in, caught the tail end of the conversation. "What are we talking about?" "Mom's real estate portfolio," Michael said with that same hollow laugh. "We're staging an intervention." "Michael," Jennifer warned, but her protest lacked conviction. "I'm serious," Michael continued, warming to his theme. "Look at her. Does she look like she needs this much space? She's letting sentiment and inertia cost her millions when she could be maximizing her assets." Eleanor turned to face her children. These adults she'd raised and sacrificed for, who now stood in judgment of her most basic act of self-determination, the choice to live in the home she loved, that she and her late husband had designed together, that carried 20 years of memories both painful and precious. "Maybe," Jennifer said cautiously, "we should help Mom look into her financial options. Like a family project." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was just beginning to catch. Eleanor saw the idea take root in Michael's eyes. Saw Daniel's weak protest die on his lips. "Just to be proactive," Michael said thoughtfully. "To ensure Mom's comfortable future. Show her she has more options than she realizes." "That's not," Daniel began. "It's being responsible," Michael interrupted. "What kind of children would we be if we didn't help Mom maximize her retirement security?" Eleanor felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, the foundation of trust she'd built with her children cracking like thin ice in the sun. They were discussing her home, her life, her autonomy as if she weren't standing right there, as if she were a problem to be solved rather than a person to be respected. "I think," she said quietly, "I'll check on the dessert now." But the seed had been planted. She could see it in Michael's calculating expression, in the way Jennifer avoided her eyes, in Daniel's desperate need to avoid conflict with his older siblings. As Eleanor arranged the lalikoi cheesecake slices on delicate plates, she felt the first chill of genuine fear. Not fear of financial insecurity, she'd made peace with her stable situation long ago. Fear of her own children and what they might convince themselves was best for her. Outside, the Hawaiian breeze picked up, rustling through the plumeria trees that stretched toward the horizon, the same land her husband had loved until the day he died, the same earth that had sustained their family for decades. Tomorrow was Sunday, and her children would be here for one more day. Eleanor had no idea it would be the last day she would ever trust them with her financial security. As she prepared for bed, organizing tomorrow's schedule in her small planner, she caught Michael watching her from the hallway, his expression thoughtful, calculating, and something else she couldn't quite identify, something that looked disturbingly like resolution. Eleanor's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the business ledger where her quarterly profit statements should have been. The desk drawer, usually organized with military precision, held only empty space where the financial documents normally waited in their labeled folder. "That's strange," she murmured, checking the cabinet beneath. Nothing. Her profit and loss statements, bank records, business loan documents, all gone. The sound of muffled conversation drifted from the living room, and Eleanor felt the first flutter of unease in her chest, not the familiar flutter of grief for her late husband, but something deeper, something that spoke of betrayal in a language she didn't want to understand. "Michael," she called, her voice steady despite the growing concern. "Have you seen my business files?" Her eldest son appeared in the doorway, coffee mug in hand, his expression carefully neutral. "Your what, Mom?" "My quarterly statements. They were right here in this drawer." Michael's pause lasted exactly 1 second too long. "Maybe you already filed them away somewhere else?" You know how organizational systems can get confusing. The suggestion hit Eleanor like cold water. She'd been managing her business files for 20 years since her husband's death. The routine was as natural, as breathing, as automatic as sunrise. She knew with absolute certainty that she hadn't moved them. "I haven't moved them," she said firmly. "They're missing." Jennifer joined them, her movements quick and nervous. Behind her, Daniel lurked in the hallway, avoiding Eleanor's eyes. The three of them formed a loose semicircle around her, and Eleanor felt something shift in the air, a subtle change in dynamics that made her skin prickle with warning. "Mom, you're being a little dramatic," Jennifer said, her voice carrying forced lightness. "They have to be somewhere." "Dramatic?" Eleanor's tone sharpened. "These documents contain sensitive financial information about our family business." "See, this is exactly what we were talking about," Michael interrupted, setting his coffee down with deliberate casualness. "You've convinced yourself you need to manage everything personally. What if we showed you there's a better way?" The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was already spreading. Eleanor stared at her son, trying to process what she was hearing. "What do you mean, a better way?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably behind Jennifer, his face flushed whether from embarrassment or guilt, Eleanor couldn't tell. "It's just that we've been looking at your finances, Mom," Jennifer said, her voice taking on the patronizing tone she used with difficult clients. "And we've identified some inefficiencies." "Inefficiencies?" The word felt foreign on Eleanor's tongue. "The flower business is underperforming," Michael said bluntly. "You're sitting on millions in real estate while maintaining profit margins that barely keep pace with inflation. It doesn't make sense." "You've been looking at my finances?" Eleanor felt her chest tighten with rising indignation. "You took my private business documents without permission?" "We're helping you," Michael said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone he used with difficult employees. "You've become dependent on doing things the old way. Sometimes fresh eyes can see opportunities you're missing." Eleanor looked at her daughter, her intelligent, educated daughter who had somehow convinced herself that 20 years of successful business management was merely sentimental inefficiency. "Jennifer, please. Those documents are private." "Financial management will be fine for 24 hours, Jennifer said firmly. "Millions of people hire financial advisors. You did it yourself for 45 years before taking over the business." "That was before I was the owner," Eleanor's voice rose, and she felt the familiar spike of stress that came with having her boundaries violated. "Mom, you're getting worked up over nothing," Daniel said, his words slightly rushed. "Chill out. It's not like we're trying to hurt you." The casual dismissal of her privacy, the reduction of her genuine business concerns to emotional overreaction hit Eleanor harder than any physical blow. These were her children, the people she'd raised, sacrificed for, loved unconditionally, and they were treating her like a confused child who needed to be managed rather than respected. "Where are they?" she demanded. "I want my business documents back now." "Tomorrow," Michael said with finality. "We'll give them back tomorrow evening after we've had a chance to present our findings. We've identified some really exciting opportunities." Eleanor felt the room tilt slightly. Her family business, carefully managed for decades, was being treated like a case study by her children. But worse than the privacy violation was the emotional devastation of realizing that her children saw her not as a competent adult managing a successful enterprise, but as an outdated thinker who needed to be humored and corrected. "This is a violation of my privacy," she said quietly. Michael laughed, actually laughed. Mom, don't be ridiculous. We're your children. We love you. We're trying to help you realize your business has untapped potential. We want you to be set for life. The laughter was the breaking point. Eleanor looked at her 3 children, really looked at them, and saw strangers. Strangers who had decided they knew better than her decades of experience, better than her careful management, better than her clearly stated boundaries. I'm calling my lawyer, she said, moving toward the phone. And tell him what? Michael's voice hardened. That your loving children are concerned about your financial future? I'm sure he'll be very interested to hear about your emotional attachment to outdated business practices. Eleanor's hand froze on the phone receiver. Michael's tone carried a threat she couldn't quite name, but the message was clear. They had already crafted their narrative. If she sought help, she would be painted as the problem. The morning sun streamed through the office window, illuminating the empty space where her business documents should have been. Eleanor felt her heart begin to race, whether from anger, shock, or the awful recognition of her complete vulnerability, she couldn't tell. Her children had taken her financial information and convinced themselves they were doing her a favor. They had turned her business expertise into a joke, her autonomy into a problem to be solved. And as Eleanor stood there, surrounded by the people who were supposed to protect her, she realized that she was entirely alone. The intervention had begun, but Eleanor Nakamura didn't know yet that by evening, it would trigger a response that would change her family forever. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Eleanor's lanai as she sat at the table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Even now, even after 3 days of legal meetings and security reviews, Michael was dismissing her business expertise as outdated traditionalism. The realization settled over her like winter frost: her children would never see her as anything more than an obstacle to their financial ambitions. Ms. Nakamura, Alan turned to her directly, I'd like to see you in my office next week. We need to discuss some changes to your estate plan and business structure, specifically safeguards to ensure this never happens again. After the lawyer left, Eleanor's children attempted what she supposed they imagined was reconciliation. Michael suggested a business consultant, just to explore options. Jennifer offered to introduce her to a financial advisor, who specializes in legacy planning. Daniel mumbled apologies that reeked of family pressure rather than genuine understanding. Eleanor accepted their gestures with gracious smiles and hollow words, but inside, something was calculating, measuring, planning with the precision of a master business owner designing the most important transaction of her career. I think, she said carefully, I need to update my estate plan. This situation has reminded me that I need to be more explicit about my wishes. Michael's eyes sharpened with interest, and Eleanor caught the quick glance he exchanged with Jennifer. Even now, even in her attorney's office, they were thinking about inheritance. Mom, you don't need to worry about that right now, Jennifer said quickly. Focus on the business. Actually, Eleanor replied, I think now is the perfect time. Alan says I have many productive years ahead, but I want to be responsible, make sure everything is in order. She watched her children process this information, saw the relief in their faces as they interpreted her words as reassurance about their inheritance. They had no idea that her mind was already working with the clarity of someone who had finally seen the truth about the people she'd raised. 2 weeks later, Eleanor sat across from Alan in his office, her hands steady as she signed document after document. The attorney had been her cousin's husband for 20 years, but he'd never seen Eleanor quite like this, calm, focused, methodical in her planning. Are you certain about these changes? Alan asked, reviewing the papers. This is a significant restructuring of your estate. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, Eleanor replied. My children have shown me exactly who they are. I'm simply responding accordingly. The new estate plan was a masterpiece of legal precision. Michael, who had orchestrated the document seizure, would receive exactly $1, the minimum required to prevent him from claiming he'd been forgotten. Jennifer, who had enabled the interference through her weakness, would inherit Eleanor's collection of family photographs and nothing more. Only Daniel, who had shown subtle signs of discomfort with the whole affair, would receive a small trust fund, enough to help him find his footing in life, but not enough to enable his passive approach to family dynamics. The bulk of Eleanor's estate, the house, the business, the carefully accumulated wealth of a lifetime, would go to 3 recipients: Keone Alana, who had shown more genuine care in 5 years than Eleanor's children had in 40, the Kailua Educational Foundation, where she'd volunteered for decades, and a new scholarship fund for Hawaiian students pursuing degrees in sustainable agriculture and floriculture. Keone doesn't know yet, Eleanor told Alan. I want to tell him myself when the time is right. Alan nodded, understanding the delicate nature of the situation. And your children? They'll find out when they need to know, Eleanor said with quiet satisfaction. For now, let them believe they're still in line for inheritance. Let them think their little intervention had no consequences beyond some temporary legal meetings. As Eleanor drove home from the lawyer's office, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the profound peace that comes from taking control of one's own destiny. Her children had taught her a valuable lesson about the difference between family and blood relations. They'd shown her that love based on expectation wasn't love at all. Now she would teach them a lesson in return, about respect, about consequences, about the fact that power, real power, belonged to the person who controlled their own narrative. Eleanor Nakamura had spent 65 years being generous, forgiving, and accommodating. Those days were over. The accounting of her revenge was now complete. All that remained was the final invoice. 3 weeks after the document incident, Michael sat in his Honolulu condo, staring at a bank statement that made his stomach turn. The numbers hadn't changed in the 20 minutes he'd been studying them, but somehow he kept hoping they would rearrange themselves into something less catastrophic. Overdue. Past due. Final notice. The words seemed to leap off the page in bold red ink, each one a reminder of how desperately he needed his mother's inheritance to materialize. The business document, borrowing, had actually been a blessing in disguise. It had reminded everyone, including Eleanor herself, of her mortality. Surely she'd be updating her will soon, making provisions for her children's financial security. His phone buzzed with a text from his ex-wife's lawyer, another reminder about missed alimony payments. Michael deleted it without reading the full message and reached for his laptop, logging into the family business account he'd been monitoring since his father's death. The screen loaded, and Michael's blood pressure spiked. A withdrawal, $50,000. Transferred to something called the Kailua Educational Foundation. His mother had donated $50,000 to a charity without consulting anyone. What the hell, he muttered, grabbing his keys. The drive to Kailua passed in a blur of mounting rage and panic. $50,000 was significant, but it was the principle that terrified him. If Eleanor was making large charitable donations without family input, what else might she decide to give away? He found her in the garden, kneeling beside her orchids with the kind of peaceful concentration that had always annoyed him. At 65, fresh from a family crisis, she should be inside resting, not playing in the dirt like some common gardener. "Mom, we need to talk," he said without preamble. Eleanor looked up, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. "Hello, Michael. What brings you out here so soon? I thought you were busy with work." "I'm busy trying to understand why you donated $50,000 without telling anyone," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Eleanor's expression didn't change. She simply returned her attention to the orchids, her movements deliberate and unhurried. "It's my money, Michael. I can spend it however I choose." "But $50,000 to some education center? Mom, you need to think about your future, about our future. What if you need that money for medical care?" "I have excellent insurance," Eleanor replied calmly, "and the Educational Foundation provides scholarships and programs for Hawaiian children who don't have family support." It seemed like a worthy cause. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Michael caught it immediately, the subtle suggestion that some children, unlike Eleanor, lacked family support, as if he and his siblings hadn't been concerned about her financial security. "We are your family support," he said, his voice rising. "We've been taking care of you, making sure you're okay. That's exactly why we were concerned about your business approach, because we care." Eleanor stood slowly, brushing dirt from her gardening gloves. "Is that what you call it? Taking care of me?" The question was asked so mildly that it took Michael a moment to recognize the steel underneath. When he did, something cold settled in his stomach. "Mom, if this is about the document thing, I thought we were past that. You got everything back, nothing was compromised. Maybe it even proved that you have more support than you thought." Eleanor removed her gloves with precise movements, folding them carefully before meeting his eyes. "Michael, I nearly lost access to important business loans. But you didn't," he said quickly. "And now you know you can handle more change than you thought. That has to be worth something." Eleanor studied her eldest son with the same attention she'd given her orchids. Careful, assessing, deciding what needed to be pruned away. "I've been thinking a lot about worth lately," she said. "About what things are really worth. What people are worth." Something in her tone made Michael's skin prickle with warning. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I've lived 65 years, and I'm finally learning to tell the difference between people who love me and people who love what I can give them." Michael felt the conversation slipping away from him, moving into territory he couldn't control. "Mom, that's not fair. We love you. We're your children. Being my children doesn't make you entitled to my estate, Michael." The words hit him like a physical blow. Michael stared at his mother, seeing a stranger in her familiar face. This wasn't the accommodating, generous woman who had always put family first. This was someone else entirely, someone who looked at him with eyes that calculated his worth and found it wanting. Entitled, he managed. Mom, I'm not entitled to anything, but we're family. Families take care of each other. Yes, Eleanor agreed quietly. They do. The question is, who's been taking care of whom? Before Michael could formulate a response, Jennifer's convertible pulled into the driveway, perfect timing as always, his sister arriving just when things got difficult. Ready to play peacemaker and smooth over the hard truths that needed to be faced. Jennifer emerged from the car with forced brightness, carrying a designer shopping bag and wearing the smile she used when she was trying to fix things beyond her control. I brought those tea towels you liked from that boutique in Honolulu, she announced, though her eyes immediately went to Michael's tense posture and Eleanor's calm stillness. Everything okay out here? Michael's concerned about my charitable giving, Eleanor said with devastating mildness. Jennifer's smile faltered. Oh. Well, I'm sure whatever you're doing is wonderful. Mom donated $50,000, Jennifer, Michael said bluntly. To an education center. Without consulting anyone. Jennifer's face went pale. Michael could see her mental calculator working, $50,000 less inheritance, $50,000 that wouldn't be there when they needed it. Her husband's real estate business was successful but not stable, her children would need college funds. The flower business was supposed to be their security. That's very generous, Mom, Jennifer said carefully. But maybe we should talk about setting up a family foundation? Something we could all be involved in, make sure your charitable goals align with practical considerations? Eleanor looked between her two children, Michael with his barely concealed desperation, Jennifer with her diplomatic manipulation, and felt the last of her illusions crumble away. Even now, faced with her clear statement of autonomy, they were scheming to regain control of her money. I think, Eleanor said quietly, that my charitable goals are perfectly clear and perfectly practical. I'm giving my money to people and causes that have earned it through genuine care and service. The emphasis on earned wasn't lost on either of her children. Michael's face flushed red while Jennifer's diplomatic mask began to crack. Mom, Jennifer tried again, we just want to make sure you're thinking clearly about all this. After the stress of last month, maybe big financial decisions should wait until what? Eleanor interrupted, her voice carrying a new edge. Until I'm too old to think for myself? Until you can have me declared incompetent? Is that the next step in taking care of me? The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Michael and Jennifer exchanged glances, and Eleanor saw the truth in their eyes. The idea had already occurred to them. If they couldn't control her through guilt and manipulation, they were prepared to consider legal options. Nobody's talking about competency hearings, Michael said quickly, but his voice carried the hollow ring of a man who had absolutely been thinking about competency hearings. Eleanor smiled then, an expression so cold and knowing that both her children stepped back involuntarily. Good, she said quietly. Because that would be a very serious mistake. As her children stood in her garden, scrambling to understand how their careful plans had gone so wrong, Eleanor felt a profound sense of clarity. The war had begun, and they had no idea how thoroughly she intended to win it. Michael's hands shook as he gripped the steering wheel, the property deed crumpled on the passenger seat beside him like evidence of his mother's betrayal. Keone Alana, a goddamn gardener, now owned the prime beachfront parcel that bordered the highway, the same land he'd been counting on to solve his financial crisis. $700,000 gone, transferred to a man who had no legal right to the Nakamura legacy, no blood connection to the family that had built this empire from volcanic soil, and stubborn determination. He slammed the car door hard enough to make the rental shake and stalked toward the beach house, his vision tinged red with the kind of rage that made rational thought impossible. Through the kitchen window, he could see his mother calmly preparing lunch, her movements unhurried and serene, as if she hadn't just committed the most devastating act of financial warfare in family history. Eleanor looked up as he burst through the door, her expression shifting from mild curiosity to watchful caution as she took in his appearance. Michael knew he looked unhinged, sweat-stained shirt, wild hair, eyes blazing with the desperate fury of a man watching his future crumble. We need to talk, he said, his voice barely controlled. Of course, dear. Would you like some iced tea? It's quite warm today. The casual offer, delivered with grandmotherly concern, snapped the last thread of Michael's self-control. Don't you dare play innocent with me. The beachfront property, Mom. You gave it to him. You gave Keone Alana $700,000 worth of prime land. Eleanor continued slicing papaya with steady hands. Keone has been more family to me than family has been, Michael. He's earned every square foot of that property. Earned it? Michael's voice cracked with incredulous rage. He's a gardener. He digs holes and plants flowers. How does that earn him a piece of our family's legacy? The profanity hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was spreading out of control. Eleanor set down her knife and turned to face her son, her expression calm but her eyes cold as winter. Steele. That man has shown me more genuine care and respect in 5 years than you've shown me in 42. He knows our business operations by heart, drives me to every meeting, listens when I speak, and treats me like a business owner worth respecting rather than an ATM to be accessed. He's manipulating you. Michael shouted, stepping closer. Can't you see it? He's playing the long game, being sweet and helpful so he can get his hands on our money. It's elder abuse, Mom. Financial exploitation. Eleanor's laugh was sharp and mirthless. Elder abuse? Like taking my business documents and telling me I was being dramatic when I wanted them back? That kind of elder abuse? The accusation hit Michael like cold water, but his desperation was stronger than his shame. That was different. That was family trying to help you realize. That was attempted financial interference, Eleanor said quietly. Alan's exact words. You could have compromised my business to prove a point about my supposed inefficiency. Michael felt the conversation spiraling beyond his control, his carefully constructed justifications crumbling under his mother's steady gaze. But the thought of losing everything, the inheritance that was supposed to save him from bankruptcy, from the creditors and lawyers and the slow dissolution of everything he'd ever worked for, made him reckless. You're not thinking clearly, he said, his voice taking on a menacing edge. This isn't you, Mom, this vindictive, spiteful person giving away our birthright to strangers. Maybe that document incident affected you more than we thought. Maybe. You need help making these kinds of decisions. The threat was barely veiled, and Eleanor heard it clearly. Her son was suggesting she was mentally incompetent, laying the groundwork for a legal challenge to her autonomy. The same son who had violated her privacy was now threatening to have her declared unfit to manage her own affairs. Are you threatening me, Michael? I'm trying to save you from yourself, he exploded. From making decisions you'll regret. When you're lying in a nursing home with nothing left because you gave it all away to some manipulative immigrant who saw you coming from a mile away. The racial slur embedded in his words made Eleanor's blood freeze. This was her son, the child she'd raised to be better than this, to show kindness to people regardless of their background. Now he stood in her kitchen, sweating and desperate, revealing the ugly truth of what he'd become. Get out, she said quietly. Mom, I'm trying to protect, get out of my house. Her voice carried the authority of a woman who had run a business and managed a fortune for decades. Now. Michael stared at her, his chest heaving with exertion and rage. You're making a mistake. A huge mistake. I won't let you destroy our family's legacy because some gardener has you fooled. Our family's legacy. Eleanor stepped closer to her son, and Michael was startled to see no fear in her eyes, only cold, implacable determination. Michael. You are a failed businessman who hasn't had a successful venture in 10 years. You've been divorced twice because you can't manage money or relationships. You violated my privacy for a power play. What exactly about that deserves to inherit anything? The words hit their target with surgical precision. Michael stumbled backward as if physically struck, his face cycling through rage, hurt, and desperate calculation. You can't do this, he said, his voice breaking. You can't just cut us out. We're your children. We have rights. You have the right to earn my respect, Eleanor replied. You've chosen not to exercise that right. Now you'll live with the consequences. From the driveway came the sound of car doors slamming, and Eleanor recognized the voices of Jennifer and Daniel approaching the house. Michael heard them too, and his expression shifted to something cunning and desperate. They'll help me stop you, he said. Jennifer and Daniel won't let you give away their inheritance to some stranger. We'll fight this, Mom. In court if we have to. We'll prove you're not competent to make these decisions. Eleanor smiled then, an expression so cold and knowing that Michael actually stepped backward. You're welcome to try, she said quietly. But I should warn you, I've been planning for this conversation much longer than you might think. And I've documented everything very carefully. As her other children entered the house, drawn by the sound of raised voices, Eleanor felt a profound sense of clarity settle over her. The gloves were finally off. The pretense of family harmony was over. Her children wanted a war over money? She would give them one. And she intended to win. Pastor Kailua had officiated 3 generations of Nakamura family weddings, but he'd never seen the family matriarch look quite like this. Eleanor sat across from him in his church office, her hands folded calmly in her lap, while he struggled to process what she'd just told him about her children's behavior. Eleanor, I have to ask, are you safe in that house? She considered the question with the same careful attention she gave everything these days. Physically, yes. Michael is many things, but he's not violent. Emotionally, that's a different matter entirely. Word of Michael's confrontation with Eleanor had spread through Kailua with the speed that only small-town gossip could achieve. Mrs. Lee at the post office had seen him storm out of the beach house and drive away with tires spinning gravel. Alan Nakamura had quietly mentioned to his wife that the Nakamura family situation was concerning. Keone had confided in his brother about Michael's racist outburst and threats. In a community where everyone knew everyone, secrets didn't exist. For long. The thing is, David, Eleanor continued, using the pastor's first name as she had for decades, I don't think Michael realizes how his behavior looks to other people. He's so focused on what he thinks he deserves that he can't see how his actions appear to the rest of the community. Pastor Kailua had counseled enough families through financial disputes to recognize the signs: adult children who viewed their parents as retirement accounts rather than people, the subtle erosion of respect that preceded outright abuse, the way money could poison relationships that should have been built on love. What Michael did with your business documents, Eleanor, that wasn't just disrespectful. It was dangerous. It was attempted financial interference, she said matter-of-factly. Alan's words, not mine. But it's taken me this long to fully accept that my own son was willing to risk my business security to prove a point about his supposed business acumen. The pastor leaned back in his chair, studying the woman who had been a pillar of his congregation for decades. Eleanor Nakamura had organized fundraisers, coordinated meal trains for struggling families, and quietly paid college tuition for parishioners' children who couldn't afford it. The idea that her own children would treat her so callously seemed incomprehensible. And now you're redistributing your estate? I'm giving my money to people and causes that have earned it through genuine service and care. Is that wrong? Before Pastor Kailua could answer, his office door opened, and Alan Nakamura entered, his expression grim. Eleanor, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we need to discuss Michael's latest threat. He's talking about filing for guardianship claims. You're being financially exploited by Keone and making decisions under diminished capacity. Eleanor's expression didn't change. Let him try. He's contacted Jennifer and Daniel, wants them to sign affidavits supporting his claim that you're mentally impaired. Says the document incident proves you can't think clearly about business matters, and the property transfers prove you can't think clearly about financial matters. Pastor Kailua watched Eleanor process this information with the calm focus of a general receiving battle reports. There was no panic, no doubt, only the steady calculation of someone who had already anticipated this move. What did Jennifer and Daniel say? Alan's expression softened slightly. Daniel refused. Told Michael that what happened with the documents was wrong, and he won't be part of any effort to take away your rights. He's been interviewing for jobs, by the way. Says he wants to stand on his own 2 feet properly. Eleanor's first genuine smile of the day crossed her face. And Jennifer? Jennifer is conflicted. She knows Michael is wrong, but she's scared of losing her inheritance entirely. She's trying to find a middle ground that doesn't exist. The three of them sat in silence for a moment, contemplating the fractures that had split the Nakamura family beyond repair. Outside, the church bells chimed noon, their familiar melody a reminder of continuity and community in the midst of family chaos. There's something else, Ellen continued. Michael went to Kai's coffee shop this morning, trying to rally support for his guardianship petition. Started telling people that Keone had manipulated you, that immigrants were taking advantage of elderly folks who couldn't think straight anymore. Eleanor's jaw tightened. How did that go over? About as well as you'd expect in a town where half the congregation has been helped by your generosity over the years. Kai asked him to leave, said he wouldn't listen to racist garbage in his establishment. Pastor Kailua nodded approvingly. Kai's right. That kind of talk has no place in our community. It gets worse, Alan said. Michael tried the same story at the flower market, the hardware store, and the bank. People aren't buying it, Eleanor. They've watched Keone work with you with their own eyes. They know the difference between exploitation and genuine partnership. Eleanor felt a warm satisfaction settle in her chest. She'd wondered if the community would see through Michael's manipulation, or if they'd be swayed by his desperate storytelling. But Kailua had always been a town that judged people by their actions rather than their words. In fact, Ellen continued with a slight smile, your property transfer to Keone has inspired some interesting conversations. The Kapunas are thinking about leaving their restaurant to their longtime chef instead of their son who moved to the mainland and never visits. Mrs. Akana is considering leaving her house to her caregiver rather than her niece who only calls when she needs money. Pastor Kailua leaned forward with interest. Eleanor, you've started something here. People are talking about the difference between family and blood relations, about what actually earns inheritance versus what people assume they deserve. Eleanor considered this unexpected consequence of her actions. She'd been focused on her own family's dysfunction, but perhaps her situation wasn't as unique as she'd thought. Perhaps other elderly people in Kailua were also being taken for granted by adult children who saw them as financial resources rather than human beings deserving of respect. Michael won't give up easily, she said. He's desperate. Desperate people do dangerous things. Alan nodded grimly. I've already documented everything: his interference with your documents, his threats, his attempts to undermine your mental capacity claims. If he tries to pursue guardianship, we'll be ready. Pastor Kailua stood and moved to his window, looking out at the town that had been his spiritual home for 15 years. Eleanor, you know I believe in forgiveness, in the power of redemption and second chances. But I also believe in justice, and sometimes justice requires consequences. Eleanor joined him at the window, looking out at the community that had rallied around her without being asked. Michael taught me that love without respect isn't love at all. It's just expectation dressed up in prettier clothes. And what about Jennifer and Daniel? Daniel is trying to change. That counts for something. Eleanor paused, considering her daughter's position. Jennifer is learning that neutrality in the face of abuse isn't kindness, it's enablement. She'll have to decide which side of that line she wants to stand on. As Eleanor prepared to leave the church, Pastor Kailua placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You know this isn't over, don't you? Michael won't accept defeat gracefully. Eleanor's smile was sharp and knowing. No, he won't. But he's made one crucial mistake in all of this. What's that? He's forgotten that I've been managing money, land, and difficult people for 65 years. He may be desperate, but I'm experienced. And experience usually wins. As she walked toward her car, Eleanor felt the strength of community support surrounding her like armor. Michael had tried to isolate her, to make her doubt her own judgment, to paint her as a confused old woman being manipulated by outsiders. Instead, he'd revealed himself as the manipulator, and she'd revealed herself as someone far more formidable than anyone had imagined. The real battle was just beginning. The conference room at Nakamura Legal Services felt smaller than usual with all the players assembled for what everyone knew would be the final confrontation. Eleanor sat at the head of the table with Eleanor Nakamura at her right, Keone at her left, and Pastor Kailua positioned as her spiritual advocate. Across from them, Michael had arranged his own army, a lawyer from Honolulu who specialized in elder law, Jennifer looking pale and conflicted, and a stack of papers that he clearly believed would be his salvation. Daniel was notably absent, a fact that seemed to surprise Michael more than anyone else. Thank you all for coming, Alan began, his voice carrying the crisp authority of someone who had handled dozens of family disputes, but never one quite this vindictive. Mr. Michael Nakamura has requested this meeting to discuss his concerns about his mother's mental capacity and recent financial decisions. Michael's lawyer, a thin man named Richards who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, cleared his throat. My client has substantial evidence that Mrs. Nakamura is suffering from diminished capacity, evidenced by her recent erratic behavior regarding business management and her inexplicable decision to transfer valuable property to non-family members. The irony of Michael claiming business mismanagement as evidence of his mother's incompetence wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Eleanor caught Alan's eye and saw him suppress what might have been either a smile or a grimace. Let's review this evidence, Alan said smoothly, pulling out his own considerably thicker file. Mr. Nakamura, you claim your mother showed poor judgment regarding her business. Can you explain the circumstances? Michael shifted uncomfortably but maintained his aggressive posture. She was obsessing over outdated business practices, refusing to consider modernization opportunities, becoming emotionally attached to operations that were clearly inefficient. We were trying to help her realize she needed a fresh perspective. By taking her documents? By showing her she needed your business expertise? Alan leaned forward, his expression deadly serious. Mr. Nakamura, I've been your mother's attorney for 20 years. Every decision in her business model is essential for maintaining the specific niche market she's developed. When you interfered with her business documentation, you caused a security crisis that required 3 days of account verification. In legal terms, what you did constitutes potential financial interference. Richards tried to interject. My client's intentions were, his intentions, Alan continued, nearly compromised his mother's business operations. I have detailed records documenting the security measures we had to implement because of unauthorized document access. If you'd like to present those in court as evidence of Mrs. Nakamura's poor judgment, I'd be happy to explain to a judge exactly whose judgment was actually impaired. Michael's face flushed red. She recovered completely. It proved she didn't need all those obsessive documentation systems. She recovered, Keone said quietly, speaking for the first time, because financial professionals took her business seriously when her own children wouldn't. Richards consulted his notes, clearly struggling with a case that was becoming more problematic by the minute. Regardless of the document incident, there's still the matter of the property transfers. Mrs. Nakamura has given away hundreds of thousands of dollars to non-family members, including substantial gifts to this man. He gestured dismissively toward Keone. Alan opened his file with theatrical precision. Let's discuss Mrs. Nakamura's property transfers. Every transaction has been documented, reviewed by independent appraisers, and executed through proper legal channels. Mrs. Nakamura demonstrated complete understanding of each decision and articulated clear reasoning for her choices. Her reasoning, Michael snarled, is that she's been manipulated by a gold-digging gardener who saw an opportunity to stop. Eleanor's voice cut through Michael's rant like a blade. The room fell silent as Eleanor rose from her chair, her 65-year-old frame somehow commanding the attention of everyone present. When she spoke, her voice carried the accumulated authority of decades managing land, money, and difficult people. Michael, you want to have me declared incompetent? Let's examine the evidence. For 20 years since your father's death, I've managed a successful flower business, increased its value by 40%, successfully invested in real estate, maintained detailed financial records, and built relationships with contractors, suppliers, and clients who all consider me a shrewd and capable businesswoman. She moved around the table with deliberate steps, her gaze never leaving her son's face. In contrast, you've defaulted on 2 business loans, filed for bankruptcy once, been divorced twice for financial irresponsibility, and gambled away your share of your father's life insurance. Your current debt exceeds $200,000, and you haven't filed accurate tax returns in 3 years. Richards looked increasingly uncomfortable as Eleanor continued her methodical destruction of Michael's credibility. You want to claim I don't understand the value of money? I turned a modest flower shop into a multi-million-dollar operation. You turned a thriving real estate office into a bankruptcy filing. You want to claim I'm being manipulated? You tried to manipulate me into believing my business documentation was unnecessary, nearly compromising my operation in the process. Michael started to speak, but Eleanor held up her hand. I'm not finished. You want to claim Keone is exploiting me? In 5 years, he's never asked for anything beyond his fair salary. He manages operations, drives me to meetings, handles client relations, and provides professional support. Meanwhile, you visit twice a year, call only when you need money, and view me as a retirement account rather than a human being. Jennifer finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Mom, I know Michael's approach is wrong, but surely there's a middle ground? Some way to preserve family unity while, she hesitated, while preserving your legacy. Eleanor's tone was gentle but cutting. Jennifer, there's no middle ground between respect and disrespect, between seeing me as a person worthy of care and seeing me as an obstacle to your financial security. She returned to her seat, her posture straight and her expression calm. Alan, please show them the documentation. Alan opened a thick folder and began spreading documents across the table, complete mental evaluations from 3 independent physicians, all confirming Eleanor's mental acuity. Cognitive assessments showing above-average function for her age group, financial records demonstrating careful money management over decades, character references from community leaders, business associates, and friends. Richards examined the papers with growing dismay. His case was evaporating before his eyes. Furthermore, Alan continued, we have extensive documentation of Mr. Michael Nakamura's concerning behavior, recorded phone conversations where he discusses his mother's estate as if it already belongs to him, witness statements about his document interference, evidence of his financial desperation and gambling problems. Eleanor watched her son's lawyer realize that he'd been handed an unwinnable case. Michael himself seemed to be grasping the magnitude of his strategic error, attempting to prove his mother incompetent while demonstrating his own complete lack of judgment and moral character. There's one more thing, Eleanor said quietly. Michael, you seem to believe you have some legal right to my estate. Let me clarify something, you don't. I have the absolute right to dispose of my property as I see fit. Your sense of entitlement is not a legal claim. She stood again, this time moving toward the door. I've made my decisions based on who has shown me genuine care and respect over the years. Keone has earned my trust and affection through 5 years of professional service. You forfeited any claim to either through your own choices. Michael's composure finally cracked completely. You can't do this. I'm your son. I have rights. You have the right to earn my respect, Eleanor replied with devastating calm. You chose not to exercise that right. Now you'll live with the consequences. As she reached the door, she turned back one final time. Jennifer, you still have time to decide what kind of person you want to be. But you can't remain neutral in your own family's crisis forever. Eleanor walked out of the conference room with Keone and Pastor Kailua flanking her like an honor guard. Behind them, she could hear Michael's voice rising in desperate anger, his lawyer trying to calm him down, and Jennifer beginning to cry. The war was over. Eleanor had won, decisively, completely, and with the kind of strategic brilliance that would be talked about in Kailua for generations. But as she stepped into the afternoon sunlight, she felt no triumph, only the profound sadness of a mother who had been forced to defend herself against her own children. The victory was absolute. The cost had been everything she'd once believed about family love. 6 months later, Eleanor stood in the doorway of what had once been her home office, watching Keone's teenage daughter Leilani arrange her textbooks on the bookshelf that had been Eleanor's business archive for decades. The sight should have brought sadness. This room held 20 years of memories with her business, but instead, Eleanor felt only warmth as the house filled with the sounds of purposeful activity again. "Auntie Eleanor, look," Leilani called, using the title that had emerged naturally over the past months. "I reorganized everything by subject like you taught me. Chemistry, biology, history all in their own sections." "It looks perfect, sweetheart," Eleanor replied, noting how Keone had carefully preserved the room's character while making space for his daughter's educational journey. The transition had been handled with the same thoughtful care that Keone brought to everything, respectful of the past while embracing the future. Eleanor's new cottage, built where the old garden shed had stood, was a masterpiece of efficient design, 1,200 square feet of carefully planned space that included a full kitchen, comfortable living area, bedroom, and bathroom designed with accessibility in mind. From her front porch, she could see the main house where Keone's family had breathed new life into rooms that had been empty too long. The cottage had cost $150,000 to build, money that Michael would have seen as his inheritance being squandered. But Eleanor had learned to measure value differently. Every morning she woke to the sound of children getting ready for school, Keone discussing the day's flower deliveries on the phone, and the general bustle of a family that was grateful for their blessings rather than resentful of their circumstances. "Ms. Nakamura?" A voice from her garden gate interrupted her reflection. Daniel stood there holding a small potted orchid, his appearance dramatically different from the uncertain, hesitant man who had participated in the document incident 6 months ago. Clean-shaven, clear-eyed, wearing the uniform of the local botanical garden where he'd found employment that matched his natural talents. Daniel. Eleanor felt genuine pleasure at seeing her youngest son. Of all her children, he was the only one who had truly understood the magnitude of what they'd done and worked consistently to make amends. "I brought this from the rare species greenhouse," he said, offering the delicate purple bloom. "Thought you might like it for your lanai. It's a hybrid they're developing." Eleanor accepted the plant, noting the confidence in Daniel's stance. Evidence of the personal growth he'd been nurturing without fanfare for the past months. He'd been sober for 5 months now, attending therapy sessions in town and working with Pastor Kailua on what he called his integrity inventory. "It's beautiful. Have you eaten lunch?" "I was hoping you'd ask." Daniel's smile was genuine, free of the desperate neediness that had characterized their interactions for years. "Keone said there's extra poke in the fridge, and I made fresh papaya salad this morning." They walked toward the cottage together, and Eleanor marveled at how comfortable these visits had become. Daniel came by twice a week now, sometimes to help with garden maintenance, sometimes just to talk. The conversations were different now, honest in a way they'd never been before. "Got an email from Jennifer yesterday," Daniel said as they settled on the cottage porch with their lunch. Eleanor waited, no longer pressing for information about her middle child. Jennifer's path to redemption was more complicated than Daniel's. Her guilt was mixed with resentment, her love with calculations about inheritance that she couldn't quite abandon. "She wants to bring the kids for Christmas. Robert too. Says she's ready to apologize properly." "And what do you think?" Daniel chewed thoughtfully before answering. "I think she's scared that if she waits much longer, it'll be too late. Lily's been calling her out on the family drama. Kids got your backbone, Mom. Doesn't let adults get away with being selfish just because they're adults." Eleanor smiled at the mention of her granddaughter. Lily had visited twice since the legal confrontation, both times bringing a clarity and moral courage that made Eleanor proud and hopeful for the future. "What about Michael?" Daniel's expression darkened. "Still sending crazy emails to anyone who will listen. Trying to get the State Bar Association interested in ethics charges against Alan. Posted something on Facebook about Hawaiian natives taking advantage of vulnerable seniors." Eleanor sighed. Michael's descent into bitter conspiracy theories had been painful to watch, even from a distance. His financial situation had grown more desperate, his isolation more complete as Kailua's community made clear their opinion of his behavior. He could come back, you know, Eleanor said quietly. If he ever truly understood what he did wrong and committed to real change, the door isn't locked forever. Daniel studied his mother's face, seeing both the pain and the resolve there. But it would have to be real change, not just apologizing because he needs money. Real change, Eleanor confirmed. Like yours. They ate in comfortable silence, watching the ocean waves break on the shore beyond the main house. At 14, Leilani moved with the confident grace of someone who had found her passion in academics, and Eleanor had quietly arranged for her to attend science camps that would position her for university scholarships. Mom. Daniel's voice carried a note of uncertainty that made Eleanor look up. I know I don't have any right to ask this, but I've been wondering about the future. About my place in all this. Eleanor set down her fork, recognizing the moment of truth that had been building for months. Daniel had been working steadily, attending therapy religiously, and slowly rebuilding his relationship with her. But he was also 35 years old with minimal savings, a fractured employment history, and a past filled with poor decisions. I've been wondering about that too, she said carefully. What do you see for yourself? I'd like to keep working at the botanical garden. I'm good at it, and I like it, makes me feel useful in a way I haven't felt in years. But I know. Everything's changed now with the business and the property trust. I don't want to assume anything. Eleanor had been hoping for this conversation. Over the past months, she'd watched Daniel develop a genuine relationship with plants and scientific categorization. More importantly, she'd watched him develop genuine respect for expertise and authority in a way he never had before. Keone and I have been discussing that, Eleanor said. The botanical garden needs someone to liaise with our flower business, someone who knows both worlds and can help develop new hybrid varieties for the hotels. It would be a partnership position between the garden and our business. Daniel's face lit up with hope and disbelief. You'd do that? After everything? I'd do that because of everything. Because you've shown me real change is possible. Because you've earned a second chance through your actions, not your words. From the main house came the sound of Keone calling to his wife about a new hotel contract, and Eleanor felt the deep satisfaction of a life well structured. The business would continue, Leilani would grow up with educational opportunities her parents never had, Daniel would have meaningful work and a chance to rebuild his life properly, and Eleanor would spend her remaining years surrounded by people who valued her for herself rather than her bank account. There's one more thing, she said, pulling an envelope from her pocket. I've established a small trust fund for you, not enough to make you wealthy, but enough to give you security if you continue making good choices. Daniel's eyes filled with tears as he took the envelope. Mom, I don't deserve, you're earning it, Eleanor interrupted gently. Every day you choose sobriety, every day you show up to work, every day you treat me and Keone and his family with respect, you're earning it. As the afternoon sun slanted across the cottage porch, Eleanor reflected on the strange mathematics of love and loss. She'd given away millions of dollars, lost 2 of her 3 children, and handed over management of the business she'd built for decades. But she'd gained a son in Keone, kept a son in Daniel, and created a legacy based on genuine care rather than financial obligation. The arithmetic of love, she realized, didn't follow the same rules as the arithmetic of money. In the distance, she could see Michael's old car parked at the overlook above the beach, its owner watching the property from afar. The sight still brought sadness but no regret. Some lessons could only be taught through consequences, and some people only learned them after it was too late. But for those willing to change, willing to earn rather than expect, willing to love rather than simply take, for those people, it was never too late to build something real. As Daniel helped her clear the lunch dishes, Eleanor felt the deep satisfaction of a foundation properly laid. Whatever time she had left would be spent on solid ground, surrounded by people who had proven their worth through actions rather than accidents of birth. The new foundation would last. 2 years after the legal confrontation that split her family forever, Eleanor Nakamura stood in the kitchen of a Lana family restaurant, watching Keone direct the evening rush with the same calm efficiency he'd once brought to managing flower deliveries and business operations. The restaurant, housed in a renovated storefront on Kailua's main street, hummed with the comfortable energy of a business built on genuine care for both food and community. To Eleanor, Table 6 wants to know if you made the hoppy a dessert, called Malia, Keone's youngest daughter, as she balanced 3 plates with the practiced grace of someone who'd grown up in restaurant kitchens. Tell them I supervised, Eleanor replied with a smile, noting how naturally the Hawaiian grandmother title had settled around her shoulders. At 67, she moved more slowly than she once had, but her mind remained sharp, her involvement in the restaurant's success a source of daily satisfaction. The business had grown beyond anyone's expectations. What began as Keone's dream of a small cafe had evolved into Kailua's most popular restaurant, serving a fusion of traditional Hawaiian dishes and Asian-inspired comfort food that drew customers from across the island. Eleanor's silent partnership had provided the initial capital, but it was Keone's skill and vision that had created something truly special. Ms. Nakamura. A young woman approached hesitantly, and Eleanor recognized her as one of the first recipients of the Hawaiian Student Scholarship Fund she'd established. I wanted to thank you again. I start nursing school at the University of Hawaii next month. Eleanor felt the familiar warmth that came with witnessing lives transformed by opportunity. The scholarship fund had grown into one of the region's most impactful educational programs, helping dozens of students access higher education that would have been impossible otherwise. Congratulations, Nalani. Your grandmother must be very proud. She is. And she says to tell you that you're proof that angels walk on earth. As the dinner rush wound down, Eleanor found herself reflecting on the strange arithmetic of loss and gain that had defined the past 2 years. She'd lost Michael entirely. Her eldest son had moved to the mainland, chasing get-rich-quick schemes and maintaining his bitter narrative about manipulation and betrayal. His Christmas cards, when they came at all, were signed with cold formality that broke her heart while confirming the rightness of her choices. Jennifer's relationship with Eleanor remained complicated but healing. Her daughter visited quarterly now, bringing genuine apologies and careful steps toward rebuilding trust. The process was slow. Jennifer still struggled with reconciling her love for her mother with her resentment about the inheritance she'd lost. But Eleanor could see real effort beneath the awkwardness. Lily, now 18 and in her freshman year studying environmental science, had become the bridge between generations. She spent summers working at the restaurant and volunteering at the scholarship foundation Eleanor had helped expand. Her clear-eyed assessment of her family's failures and her grandmother's strength provided hope that some branches of the family tree would grow strong and straight. Daniel had exceeded even Eleanor's cautious optimism. 3 years sober, he'd married Nalani Kealoha, a teacher from the Botanical Gardens Education Department, and they were expecting their first child in the spring. His transformation from desperate, approval-seeking youngest son to respected botanist and community member had been the most profound redemption Eleanor had witnessed. Ready to head home? Keone asked, appearing at Eleanor's elbow with the gentle attentiveness that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. Home. The word carried layers of meaning now. Eleanor's cottage on the beachfront property had become more than just a residence. It was the center of a chosen family that functioned with the kind of love and respect she'd always hoped her biological family might achieve. As they drove through the Hawaiian twilight toward the beach, Eleanor reflected on the conversation she'd had that morning with her doctor, now officially retired but still her friend and occasional medical consultant. Her latest test showed what they'd both expected: time was becoming a more precious commodity. Her heart, managed carefully for years, was showing signs of increasing fatigue. At 67, she was living on borrowed time, but it was time well spent. I've been thinking about the final arrangements, she said as Keone turned into their driveway. Keone's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel, but his voice remained steady. What kind of arrangements? The will is complete, of course. You know most of what's in it. But I want to discuss the letter I've written for Michael. They'd had this conversation before, but Eleanor felt compelled to revisit it as her health declined. The letter, to be delivered only after her death, represented her final attempt to reach the son who had chosen bitterness over reconciliation. It offered no money, no inheritance beyond the symbolic dollar required by law, but it did offer something potentially more valuable: a road map back to dignity and family connection, if he ever chose to follow it. Do you think he'll read it? Keone asked as they settled on Eleanor's cottage porch, the familiar ritual of evening conversation that had become precious to both of them. I don't know. But I had to try. He's still my son, despite everything. The ocean spread out before them in the golden light of sunset, the same waves that had soothed her husband's final days, the same eternal rhythm that had sustained their family for decades. I've been thinking about legacy lately, Eleanor continued. What we leave behind. What matters in the end. Keone waited with the patience that had always been one of his greatest qualities. Michael thought legacy was money passed down through bloodlines. But I think real legacy is the lives you touch, the positive changes you create, the love you spread that continues to grow after you're gone. As if summoned by the mention of legacy, headlights appeared on the beach road. Daniel's truck pulled into the yard, and Eleanor saw her youngest son and his wife step out, Nalani's pregnancy beginning to show in the careful way she moved. Thought we'd stop by and see how the restaurant went tonight, Daniel called, approaching the porch with the easy confidence that had replaced his former desperate neediness. Very well, Eleanor replied, watching Nalani settle into the porch swing with the satisfied exhaustion of someone who'd spent the day teaching elementary schoolers. Nalani, how are you feeling? Like I'm growing a future soccer star, Nalani replied with a laugh, rubbing her expanding belly. This baby has strong legs. As they talked about baby preparations, restaurant business, and botanical research, Eleanor felt the deep satisfaction of a life that had found its proper shape. The family gathered on her porch bore no blood relation to her except through Daniel, but they represented the kind of love she'd always hoped to cultivate: respectful, supportive, genuine, and free from the toxic expectations that had poisoned her relationships with Michael and, to a lesser extent, Jennifer. Auntie. Leilani called from the main house. Phone call for you. It's Lily. Eleanor made her way to the phone, marveling as always at her granddaughter's impeccable timing. Lily seemed to sense when connection was needed most. Grandma. I hope I'm not calling too late. Lily's voice carried the warmth and strength that reminded Eleanor of herself at that age. Never too late for you, sweetheart. How's school? Challenging but wonderful. I'm learning so much about environmental conservation, and I keep thinking about what you went through with the family drama. It's made me passionate about preserving what matters for future generations. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. Lily had transformed the family's darkest moment into motivation for protecting what was valuable and worth saving. That was legacy, pain transformed into purpose, suffering that created wisdom to prevent future suffering. I wanted you to know, Lily continued, that I've declared a specialization in Indigenous conservation practices. I want to work with Native Hawaiian communities who might not have financial resources but have generational knowledge worth protecting. Your grandfather would be so proud, Eleanor whispered. After the call ended, Eleanor returned to the porch, where her chosen family continued their gentle evening conversation. The stars were emerging in the clear Hawaiian sky, the same stars that had watched over the islands for generations. You know what I realized today? Eleanor said, settling back into her chair. I spent most of my life trying to build a family. Legacy based on land and money and blood relationships. But the real legacy, the one that matters, is this. She gestured to encompass the porch, the family gathered there, the thriving restaurant in town that employed 15 people, the scholarship fund that was changing lives, the conservation partnerships that were preserving Hawaiian traditions. Love that's earned rather than expected. Respect that's given freely rather than demanded. Care that comes from choice rather than obligation. That's what lasts. Keone reached over and squeezed Eleanor's hand. You've built something beautiful, Auntie. Something that will keep growing long after we're all gone. As the evening deepened and the family began to drift toward their respective homes, Eleanor remained on her porch, looking out at the ocean that had shaped her life and the people who had given it meaning. Somewhere on the mainland, Michael was probably nursing his grievances in isolation. Somewhere in California, Jennifer was probably struggling with guilt and resentment in equal measure. But here on this porch, surrounded by the sound of children's laughter and adult conversation and the endless whisper of Hawaiian waves on sand, Eleanor had found the peace that comes from living according to one's deepest values. She had asked them to repay their debt of childhood, just as they had demanded she provide for their adulthood. But while their demands had been about entitlement, hers had been about teaching the value of genuine respect and earned love. A $500,000 invoice not of currency, but of character. The arithmetic of righteous response had become the mathematics of redemption, and the equation balanced perfectly. As Eleanor prepared for bed in her cottage, she offered a prayer of gratitude for the bitter lesson that had taught her the difference between family and blood, between love and expectation, between legacy and inheritance. Some gifts, she had learned, could only be given to those wise enough to receive them. And some love could only be shared with those brave enough to earn it. The stars over Hawaii shone down on a woman who had transformed betrayal into wisdom, cruelty into kindness, and loneliness into the richest kind of family love. Eleanor Nakamura slept peacefully, surrounded by the sound of people who loved her for exactly who she was rather than what she could give them. Her legacy was complete. The morning sun streamed through Eleanor's bedroom window, casting golden light across her favorite quilt, a traditional Hawaiian design that Keone's mother had given her for her 65th birthday. The gesture had meant more than any expensive gift her biological children had ever purchased. It represented acceptance. The recognition that family could be chosen rather than merely inherited. 3 years had passed since the confrontation that had reshaped her life and legacy. At 68, Eleanor moved more slowly now, but her mind remained sharp and her purpose clear. Today was a special day, the official opening of the Nakamura Lana Cultural Center, the culmination of her most ambitious project yet. A gentle knock sounded at her door. Tutu? Are you awake? Leilani's voice called softly. Come in, sweetheart. I'm just getting ready. Leilani entered, now 17 and carrying herself with the confidence of a young woman who knew her worth and purpose. In 3 months, she would be leaving for college on the mainland, a full scholarship to study marine biology, following her passion for ocean conservation. Everyone's gathering for breakfast before the ceremony. Dad made your favorite loco moco. Eleanor smiled. Tell him I'll be there in 10 minutes. As she dressed in her finest muumuu, a royal blue patterned with white plumeria blossoms, Eleanor thought about the journey that had brought her to this day. The Nakamura Lana Cultural Center represented everything she believed about true legacy. Built on land she'd donated from the flower farm, the center would serve as both a tourist attraction showcasing authentic Hawaiian culture and a community hub providing educational opportunities for local children. The profits would fund scholarships for Hawaiian students pursuing careers in cultural preservation, sustainable agriculture, and environmental protection. More importantly, it represented the blending of two families, the Nakamuras and the Alanas, who had found in each other the respect and genuine care that transcended blood ties. The main house bustled with activity when Eleanor arrived. Keone supervised final preparations for the breakfast, while his wife Lay arranged fresh flower centerpieces cut from the farm that morning. Daniel and Nalani chased their toddler son Kai around the living room, his delighted giggles providing the perfect soundtrack to family harmony. There she is, Keone announced, pulling out Eleanor's chair at the head of the table. The woman of the hour. Eleanor accepted the seat with a gracious smile. I'm hardly the only one responsible for today. This has been a community effort. From the beginning. Yes, but it was your vision, Daniel said, settling Kai into his high chair. You saw what was possible when the rest of us couldn't. Breakfast passed with the comfortable conversation of a family that had found its rhythm. They discussed last-minute details for the opening ceremony, shared stories about the construction process, and made plans for the center's first educational programs. As they were finishing, the sound of a car in the driveway caught everyone's attention. Through the window, Eleanor saw Jennifer emerge from a rental car, followed by Lily and Jason, now young adults themselves. They're early, Eleanor said with pleased surprise. Jennifer had confirmed she would attend the opening, but wasn't expected until later that morning. Her visits had become more frequent over the years, each one less strained than the last. As she gradually came to terms with the new family structure, Robert never accompanied her. Their marriage had ended the previous year, another casualty of priorities misaligned. Grandma. Lily rushed through the door first, enveloping Eleanor in a fierce hug. At 20, she was the spitting image of Eleanor in her youth, strong features, determined eyes, and an unmistakable sense of purpose. Look at you, Eleanor said, holding her at arm's length. More beautiful every time I see you. Jennifer hung back slightly, her expression a mixture of pride and lingering discomfort. Though their relationship had healed considerably, there remained an unspoken acknowledgement of the mistakes that had necessitated that healing. Mom, Jennifer said, stepping forward to embrace Eleanor carefully. The center looks amazing. We drove past it on the way here. Thank you for coming, Eleanor replied simply. It means a great deal to me. Jason, now 18 and headed to community college in the fall, hung back awkwardly until Leilani pulled him into a conversation about marine biology, his own chosen field. The cousins had developed a friendship independent of their parents. Complications, another hopeful sign for the future. Where's Robert? Keone asked, always direct but never unkind. Jennifer's smile tightened slightly. In California. The divorce was finalized last month. I'm sorry to hear that, Eleanor said, meaning it. Despite her complicated feelings about her son-in-law, she took no pleasure in her daughter's pain. Don't be, Jennifer replied with surprising candor. It was overdue. Some partnerships are built on the wrong foundation from the beginning. The wisdom in her daughter's words wasn't lost on Eleanor. Jennifer had learned difficult lessons about the nature of genuine partnership, lessons that might have spared her pain if she'd recognized them sooner. As they prepared to leave for the ceremony, Eleanor pulled Jennifer aside. I have something for you, she said, handing her a small envelope. Jennifer opened it cautiously, then looked up in surprise. Inside was a key and a deed to a modest but beautiful cottage on the edge of the property, not Eleanor's cottage, but a newly built structure overlooking the eastern gardens. Mom, what is this? A place for you, if you want it, Eleanor said simply. No strings attached. Yours regardless of what happens between us. A place to find your footing again. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. After everything, why? Because you're learning. Because you're trying. Because despite everything, you're still my daughter, and I believe in second chances for those who truly want them. Jennifer clutched the key tightly. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything right now. Just think about it. The cultural center was already bustling with activity when they arrived. Local officials, community members, and tourists gathered in the open courtyard where traditional Hawaiian dancers would soon perform the blessing ceremony. The architecture blended modern functionality with traditional Hawaiian design elements. Soaring timber beams, lava rock walls, and expansive windows framing views of mountains and ocean. Pastor Kailua approached Eleanor as she surveyed the gathering crowd. Now in his 70s, he moved with the dignified pace of an elder respected for his wisdom rather than feared for his judgment. "Eleanor, this is truly remarkable," he said, gesturing to the center. "A living legacy." "Thank you, David. None of this would have happened without your support during the darkest days." The pastor smiled thoughtfully. "Sometimes our greatest growth comes from our deepest pain. You've demonstrated that beautifully. Have you heard anything from Michael?" Eleanor asked quietly. Though she'd long accepted her eldest son's absence, she never stopped hoping for reconciliation. "Nothing direct," Pastor Kailua admitted. "But I heard from his ex-wife that he's been sober for 6 months. Taking some business courses at a community college in Oregon." Eleanor nodded, allowing herself a moment of cautious hope. "That's something, at least." "Never underestimate the power of seeing others thrive without you," the pastor said gently. "Sometimes the most powerful lesson is watching the world continue turning after you've removed yourself from it." The ceremony began with traditional Hawaiian chants and blessings, followed by speeches from community leaders and educators who would be involved with the center's programs. When it was Eleanor's turn to speak, she approached the podium with the quiet confidence of someone who had found her true purpose. "3 years ago," she began, "I faced a crisis that forced me to reconsider everything I thought I knew about family, legacy, and what we owe to one another. What began as pain became an opportunity to build something more meaningful than I ever imagined." She paused, looking out at the gathered faces, Keone and his family, Daniel and Nalani with little Kai, Jennifer and her children, the scholarship recipients who represented the future, the community members who had rallied around her in her darkest hour. "This center isn't named Nakamura Lana by accident. It represents the truth I've learned, that family isn't defined by blood but by respect, not by obligation but by choice, not by what we take but by what we give." Eleanor gestured to the building behind her. "Everything you see here was built with the understanding that true wealth isn't what we accumulate but what we share. True legacy isn't what we leave to our children but what we leave in them. And true love isn't what we feel but what we demonstrate through our actions." As she concluded her speech, Eleanor noticed a figure standing at the back of the crowd, a man in his mid-40s, watching intently. She caught her breath as recognition dawned. Michael, thinner than she remembered, his formerly arrogant posture replaced by something more humble, more watchful. He didn't approach. He didn't make his presence known to the others. But he was there, witnessing the culmination of what his actions had set in motion 3 years earlier. Their eyes met briefly across the crowded courtyard, no words, no gestures, just acknowledgement. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing down the path toward the beach. Eleanor felt no triumph in that moment, only profound peace. The invoice she had issued wasn't about punishment but education. Some lessons took longer to learn than others, but the first step was always witnessing the truth with clear eyes. As the ceremony concluded and guests began exploring the center, Eleanor found herself standing beside the taro garden with Pastor Kailua. "I saw him," she said quietly. The pastor nodded. "I thought you might. Will you reach out to him?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. "No. The door is open, but he needs to choose to walk through it. Some journeys can't be rushed." "You've become very wise, Eleanor Nakamura." She smiled, watching Daniel explain the traditional taro farming methods to a group of tourists, seeing Jennifer tentatively joining a conversation with Lei and Nalani, noticing Lily and Leilani already planning future programs for the center's youth education initiative. "Not wise," she corrected gently. "Just experienced. I've learned that the most valuable things in life can't be inherited, they must be earned. Love, respect, trust. They're not entitlements. They're achievements." Pastor Kailua followed her gaze to the thriving, blended family that had formed in the aftermath of betrayal. "And you've achieved something remarkable here." "We all have," Eleanor replied. Together. Later that evening, as the celebration continued at the main house, Eleanor slipped away to her cottage for a moment of quiet reflection. On her desk lay the envelope containing the invoice she had prepared 3 years earlier, not a real invoice, of course, but a symbolic one. $500,000, the estimated cost of raising 3 children to adulthood, itemized in painful detail. Room and board, $210,000 education, $175,000 medical care, $45,000 extracurricular activities, $30,000 clothing and personal items, $40,000 she had never sent it. Its purpose had never been to demand repayment but to remind herself of an essential truth, that what we give our children is a gift, not a loan. That love should flow from generosity, not obligation. And that respect must be earned through actions, not demanded through entitlement. Eleanor placed the invoice in her fireplace and lit a match. As the paper curled and blackened in the flames, she felt the last remnants of bitterness dissolve. The lesson had been taught. The healing had begun. The legacy she truly valued was secured not in bank accounts or property deeds but in the values she saw reflected in the generations that would follow her. Outside, the Hawaiian stars shone with timeless clarity, witnesses to countless human dramas of loss and redemption. Eleanor stepped onto her porch, breathing in the fragrant night air, and offered a silent prayer of gratitude. For the pain that had brought clarity. For the loss that had created space for something new. For the betrayal that had taught her the true meaning of loyalty. And for the invoice that had never needed to be sent because its true purpose had already been fulfilled. The arithmetic of family had never been about money. It had always been about value, recognizing it, honoring it, and nurturing it wherever it was found. As Eleanor returned to the gathering, to the sounds of laughter and conversation and music drifting across the property, she carried with her the peaceful certainty that she had not only survived betrayal but transformed it into something infinitely more precious than what she had lost. Not just a legacy of wealth, but a legacy of wisdom. Not just a family of blood, but a family of choice. Not just an inheritance of money, but an inheritance of values. And in the end, that was worth more than all the dollars in the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.